Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club and my firm, Brimacombe & Associates, welcome to Club Entrepreneur. I started Club E back in 2007 to provide peer support, productive relationships, and actionable content. Thinking about the introduction today, I was going to try to crack some joke about the weather because a couple of weeks ago we were in the snowstorm, and now we have summer, and it's so very Minnesotan to talk about the weather. But then it's like, oh, we got these kind of holidays coming up. We have the Kentucky Derby, which is practically a holiday. We got Cinco de Mayo. We got Mother's Day. And by the way, congratulations and thank you to all you mothers out there. But that led me to Father's Eve. And if you've not heard of Father's Eve, John Francis, raise your hand. John and a couple of buddies started Father's Eve in 2012. And I'm sure John would like to tell you a little bit more about it, but it's a celebration of dads. So since we're celebrating moms, again, thank you very much for all you moms out there. Also wanted to celebrate dads. And John had 40 Father's Eves last year, and he's trying to get to 100. And the reason I'm mentioning it today is maybe there's somebody in this audience that would like to host a Father's Eve party and see John to do that. So as it relates to board readiness and Mary Clone of Navigate Forward, I've gone through the board readiness program. I've gotten a bunch of value out of it, and that's why I invited Mary to speak today. But before we get to Mary and her partner, Teresa Daly, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors. Schwegman, Lumberg, Woosner is an intellectual property law firm. Olson Thielen CPAs is a full-service accounting firm. Irish Titan is a web development and an e-commerce company. And we have Darren Lynch there in the back. And let's see, Megan, where are you? Over here up in the front. So we got front and back covered with Irish Titan. Sunbelt Business Brokers is a M&A advisory firm. McLeod and Company is a holistic marketing agency. And we have the Sam and Sam team. Where are you all? The Sam and Sam, boy Sam, girl Sam over there. Anyway, they do a bunch of work for me, for my companies, for Club E, as does Irish Titan. Anyway, so that's McLeod. And then Highland Bank is a $500 million family-owned community bank. Rick Wall is over here to my left. And then Andrew, where's Andrew's over here, also to my left. Thank you for sponsoring Club E. And then the Network Connect is kind of a cousin to Club E that I do with Dick Summerstedt, and they're also a sponsor. Just a reminder to RSVP online with Brown Paper Ticket. They shut down, as some of you find out, the online reservations 24 hours in advance, so please remember to sign up online. On clube.com, you can register for our newsletter as well as sign up to be a part of the business directory. The LinkedIn group, Club Entrepreneur-Minneapolis, has over 2,600 people in it, so that's a great way to connect with the people you're meeting here today. We have a meetup group with over 1,900 folks. And then again, on the website Club E, you can sign up for the email list or give me your card, and I will add you to that. Minneapolis Club, as I mentioned, is a partner, been a big part of making this a success. If anybody would like to learn about the Minneapolis Club, please let me know. And then the folks at McLeod and Co. were kind enough to start in January of this year a Business of the Month, where they have a fishbowl that some of you may have seen coming in. Drop your card in, they pull a card, and then we promote that business for the month through the Club Entrepreneur channels. And the Business of the Month this month is Depart Smart, and Cheryl Hill is over here, straight ahead of me. And Depart Smart inspires the world so that people can travel abroad safely. And Cheryl has been a speaker at Club E in the past and a participant a couple times in the Minnesota Cup, and I've tried to help her because it's a great organization with a wonderful offering, and the mission is also very powerful. So good luck to Cheryl with what she's doing. There's little cards on your tables if you'd like to learn more about Depart Smart. And if you wanted to visit their website, it's departsmart.org. So thank you, Cheryl, for being a supporter of Club Entrepreneur, and good luck with what you're doing at Depart Smart. Future Club Entrepreneur events, there's a little card on your table. There's a panel of investors next week that might be of interest to you for those of you raising money or thinking about raising money. And then there's a whole host of other things that you can see there on that card on your table. Okay, so a couple of things about today's discussion on board readiness. I've done a couple of panels kind of from the company's perspective about boards, and this is more about the individual board member's perspective. So I know I got a couple of emails with some questions that folks were hoping to have answered. I will interact probably more on a one-on-one basis with you about those questions if it's from a company perspective. So today's a little bit more of kind of a personal board member, board level discussion. Anyway, Mary co-founded Navigate Forward with her partner Teresa Daly 10 years ago, and they provide executive transition services. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Teresa and Mary over the last couple of years through the Minneapolis Club, through Club Entrepreneur, and as I mentioned, have used their services and found those to be very valuable and helpful. So wanted to ask a couple of quick questions, and I'm going to introduce Teresa. First question is, how many of you are at a company that has a board? If I could see your hand. Okay. And then how many of you currently serve on a board? Oh, a number of hands. How many of you, if you didn't serve on a board, would like to serve on a board, or if you're on a board, would like to serve on more boards? I kind of thought I would see a bunch of hands on that one, so thank you for sharing that with me. Again, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Mary and Teresa through the Minneapolis Club as well as their business and Club Entrepreneur. And with that, I would like to introduce Teresa Daly, and kind of a fun little tidbit about Teresa. Come on up. Fun little tidbit about Teresa is that I have known and interacted with her father for a number of years, but I had never put it together till their party, their 10-year anniversary party about a month ago. And Rich Daly, if you haven't met Rich, is a fabulous guy. And one of the most amazing things about Rich that I thought is about 10 years ago, he shifted his practice just to focus on SaaS companies. And this is Teresa's father that I'm talking about. So the guy is smart, sharp as a tack, and a lot of foresight. So anyway, welcome, Teresa, and tell us a little bit about your company. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. It is really a pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much to Rick for the invitation to speak. We're excited to share some good thoughts with you today. Just to tee it up a little bit, Navigate Forward, as Rick said, was a firm started by myself and my business partner, Mary Clone, 10 years ago. We work with executives in transition. So we're not a search firm, we're not a placement firm. The majority of our clients come to us out of companies where the company they're coming out of is offering our services as part of their separation agreement. And about 30% of our execs come to us on their own as well. We work with about 400 executives a year these days, and we started the firm because we believed that there was a need in the market for a firm that would focus on the senior level transition. So that is the client that we serve. And we believed that we could bring a fresh approach to that work. As you might guess, when you work with senior level executives, many of them are interested in board service. And that's where our board readiness practice has evolved from. And we've been doing board readiness as part of executive transition for about 8 of our 10 years, but we really formalized the practice in 2015. And today it is our fastest growing practice. So we're delighted to be here and to share our thoughts with you. We found that the unique approach that we employ with our executives really translates well into a powerful approach to help senior level executives really package and position themselves for corporate board service. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. So without much further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my business partner and dear friend, Mary Clone. Mary is the COO of Navigate Forward, and Mary leads our board readiness practice and has over the years really worked hard to develop a robust and compelling approach to board readiness, and so it is my pleasure to bring her up.
Okay, I'm going to turn that off, and hopefully we won't have a lot of stuff if I stand here. My speaking coach told me I couldn't hide behind the podium, so that means I have to stand here. We'll see how it goes because I'm a little nervous. But anyway, we'll just get going. You know, I think that board readiness is definitely one of those things that is a conversation that more and more people are having. And about 10 years ago, it hadn't permeated our entire community yet because it was really for only that top of the house people. Too loud?
I'm just going to adjust you down.
Adjust me down, okay?
Try that.
Okay. Oh yeah, okay. So it was really, today is for all of us. I think all of us have an opportunity to, at some point in our careers, get on boards. What I'm going to talk about today are these 4 things. So really market intelligence, what's going on in the market? What does it look like? What do you have to know? That kind of thing. I'm also going to talk about readiness. So how do you assess your own readiness? How do you get ready? How do you know if your credentials are strong enough? I'm going to talk about increasing your readiness, so giving you some tips and ideas if you have a long enough runway. Here are some additional things that you could do. And then I'm going to talk about how do you go to market. So that's kind of what it's going to look like. As Rick said, this is more based on individuals who are interested in getting on boards versus corporations who are interested in hiring board members. But hopefully you'll all get something out of it as we go forward. So there's a lot of different kinds of boards and a lot of different kinds of places.
Sorry.
Okay.
We're just getting getting a little feedback, Mary. So.
This is my speaking coach. I'm never inviting her again. Okay, so there's a lot of different kinds of boards. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. You know, there's small nonprofits. There's lots of those. There's large nonprofits, you know, more on the symphony, the zoo, other bigger companies, Feed My Starving Children, a lot of big nonprofits. And then there's the public sector boards, which is that whole government and community leadership type. They're usually appointed. Multinational, that's those big ones, General Mills, Target, all of that. But what we're really going to talk about today, and all of my information, is really about that publicly held and privately held companies that are corporate paid boards. So that's what the information is going to be about today. One of the first questions that I always think people should ask when they're starting to think about boards is, do you have the emotional commitment and the mental commitment and the time to make the commitment to a board? And oftentimes when I first start, people will say, well, you know, it's only 4 meetings a year. How hard can that be? But for anyone who's been on a board, you will see that, you know, it's a lot more than 4 meetings a year, because there's you have to add in retreats, you have to add in travel, you have to add in reading the board book, crisis, committees. So the average corporate board is probably around 300 to 500 hours per board. So think about, do you have the time, do you have the energy to move into the corporate board world? So let's see. Oh, this thing falls asleep. Okay. So one of the things that I think people think about is how hard is it to get on a board, and are there any board seats open? Well, board turnover is at its height, which is interesting because that's kind of a new piece. But in 2016, and what you will see is all the data is 2016 because the data isn't out for 2017, and all the data relates to S&P 500. what I found is if you kind of get that, if you know what that is, every company pretty much follows this same kind of trend. But in 2016, the Fortune 500 filled 399 vacant seats with independent directors, first-time directors as well. This is the largest in 7 years. So 399 new directors entered into the board world. So that's about 32% of new directors, which is a big number. Last year, in 2015, it was 26%. So you can see new directors, people are getting on boards at a rate that hasn't happened before. But you can also see from the slide, board seats are going down. So even though there's a lot more new directors hitting the market, there's a lot less board seats. Why do you think that is? Anybody? Consolidation, bankruptcy, acquisitions, all of those things that change the number of Fortune 500 or S&P 500. But there are some new trends. One of the new trends is for the first time in a long time, or let's just say 23% of all of those new directors were not at the C-suite level. They were at the EVP or VP level. And that's a change, because normally you hear a lot about you have to be a CEO, you have to be a CFO, but in the new landscape, boards are opening up more to people who have the expertise they need at a different level. There's also investment experience is on the rise, so it moved up 8%, and international experience almost doubled. So one of the things, if you're thinking about how do you get on boards and you're young enough, you might take that international assignment, or you might try to do an international project or be involved in the international team. Another new trend, women. So this is one of the bigger trends that we've seen. So today, 32% of all of those new directors are female. That's a big number. It's the highest since they started tracking in 1998. And 99% of all S&P boards have a woman on their board. So that means there are only 6 companies that do not have at least one woman. That is history in the making. I wish I could say the same for minorities, because 10 years ago, minorities were at about 10% of directors were of a minority class. Usually that means in the statistics of color. Today, 10%. So their history is not yet in the making, but hopefully over the next 10 years, things will start to change there too. So what's the wish list? What do boards really want? What do they look for? It isn't usually or isn't always the best all-around athlete. So you could be great, but you might not be the right person for them. So if you look at this wish list, you can see, I'm not going to read them all, you can read it. Women, active CEOs, COOs, still a big number. Global perspective, all of those things. One of the things that I think that really they're looking for is people who have been there, done that. So if you're looking at a board, they probably want someone who has 2 times the revenue experience that they have. So in other words, if they're a $100 million company, they're looking for people who have been at the senior level for a $200 million company. That's a general rule of thumb, so just keep that in mind. So in other words, if the biggest P&L you've ever had is 50 million, you're probably not going to get on the target board. Okay? So boards are really looking for leaders who have the same issues who they have, who can deal with complicated benefit and compensation issues, who can lead by, who understand the business that they have and understand the big picture, the strategic picture. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes they're looking for candidates who their stakeholder profile matches. I find that less, but it is still happening. So here's standing committees. You got to know what they are. These are average, and not everybody has all of these standing committees. Sometimes they have different standing committees, but if you're thinking about where would I fit on a board, this is a general way of looking and saying, oh, I would fit in the audit committee, or I could fit on the comp committee. just a general idea for you to think as you're preparing your board bio. So what are the two most important things of a board? I think this is always the hardest. When I'm working with executives, they're used to running a company. They're used to having the final decision. They're used to doing. So C-suite players, what you do is you execute, you do a little strategy, but you execute for results. That's what you get paid for as a president. When you're on a board, you don't get paid for that because they don't need that because they have a CEO. So that's always the biggest leap. When you're when you're a board of directors, what you are really there for is thought leadership. So yes, you are there to do some CEO succession planning, obviously, hiring and firing, monitoring management, those kinds of monitoring things, and also to approve strategy, work through crisis, but you're not actually there to do. So sometimes when you're writing a board bio and you put all these achievements, those achievements don't help you because they know that they already have people to do all that stuff. What they want you for is thought leadership. You know, if someone has questions, we are going to have Q&A at the end, but I also can take questions off the cuff. So if you would like to, don't hesitate. Some examples of other central responsibilities that all boards have to have. So you can read the list: protecting the shareholders, executive comp, director recruitment, shareholder communication, things like that. It's really trying to make you start to think about what's the difference between leadership and thought leadership. Another newer piece, I think, is this activist shareholder. So you have to, if you're a board of directors, you have to really understand what is an activist shareholder, what do they do, how do you navigate through the activities. And I'm sure you've all been reading the paper over the last year. There's plenty of activist shareholder communication going on. So how do directors get picked? Everybody wants to know, how do I become a director? I want that job. That sounds fun. Well, in reality, they do it through networking. So friends of current board members, that's still the most common. Current former CEO, CFO experience, leadership, international, people who you've met throughout your career. They want to have enterprise development experience. They want to have, you have already been on a board. That's usually one of the hard ones because if you've never been on a board, it's hard to get on a board. And if you've never been on a board and they want people who've been on a board, it's a circle. But things are changing. I think what is true is that today is really still about networking. Tomorrow, who knows what it'll look like. The landscape is changing. It could look different in 5 years. But today, it's all about networking. And you can see that by the statistics. So if you look at this, you will see that really about 80%, almost 80% of all board seats are filled through personal networking. About 55% through a board committee, identified from a board committee, and guess how they find the people? It's through their network. Search firms, again, people think that's the highest one, about 50%. And that usually it's swaying the number a little bit because the bigger the company, the more likely they are to use a search firm. So if it's a multinational company, certainly they're using search firms. In the publicly held and privately held, the bigger ones maybe, the smaller ones for sure not. And then of course shareholder suggestions and director databases. Question?
So on the previous slide, you talked about the IT, you have the word now. What does that mean?
So, it says now including expertise in social media. So a lot of companies who are in the smaller range, they don't have a full-time IT person, they don't understand social media, they don't really get the whole idea of how you can do that. So if you have an expertise in social media or in IT that leads to certain kinds of things, cyber risk is another one, that is a valuable skill today. So boards, when I think about a board, you kind of say, well, who do you want on your board? You probably want people who are different than the people you're paying. So in other words, if you're an attorney, it's a little harder if you don't have some other thought leadership area because they already have an attorney. They have an attorney on their, in their staff, and they are working with an attorney. So to have a board member who's an attorney might not be what they need, that kind of thing. That clear that up for you? Okay, so assessing your readiness. So how do you know if you can be on a board? What works, what doesn't work? So here are the kinds of things that we talk about. Now, when I'm working with my clients, we have some robust self-assessment tools that we use, and we're going to talk a little bit about one really simple one here. But the basics are, you've got to be able to, look at what's your work experience. Is it big enough? Is the scope full enough? Have you had high enough level jobs? Are you an expert in your field? Outside of your functional area, do you have any expertise? That kind of experience, P&L experience. If you've never held a P&L, now's the time to try to maneuver through your company to get a P&L project, because you have to have owned a P&L, pretty much. Thought leadership expertise, again, in and outside of your area of functional area, but the more you speak, the more people look to you as an expert. Associations where you're the speaker, anything that you can prove thought leadership for, and you can talk about it and it's interesting. Board experience, so obviously they'd like board experience. If you don't have corporate board experience, then non-profit boards, the bigger the better, where you take a leadership role. So if you're just on the board, it doesn't transfer well enough, but if you're a leadership role, chairman of the board, better. And education. I don't know, I haven't seen a big difference between if you have a PhD and you have a master's degree, would they pick one over the other? I haven't seen that. But obviously if you don't have a college degree, it's really hard. So we're going to just do a quick little test. There's brochures on your table. And if you open up the brochure, there's two pieces. One says look inside and one says test yourself. And so I just want you to look at the test yourself page. There are 7 questions here, sorry. 7 questions. This is just kind of the first little tickle. So if you look at these 7 questions and you can answer yes to 5 of these questions honestly, so that would mean you'd look in the mirror and you'd say, oh, I really have that. You could honestly answer yes to 5 of the 7 questions. I would tell you that you probably should be thinking about being on a board, that it's within your scope. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes or a minute, 60 seconds, to just kind of read through them. Question?
Would you describe thought leadership? So, in what form is that thought leadership? Speaking or writing?
I look at thought leadership as having an expertise in a field where you can shape the conversation around that topic. So, did that answer that?
With statistics how formative do you have to be?
I don't think you have to have won an award saying that you're the CFO of the year, but I think you have to be. If somebody asked, so if we went around and talked to 5 or 6 of your colleagues and we said, well, does Mary know anything about this? They would all say, oh yeah, that's the go-to person we go to. So when our company we all have those people in our company who you go to them because they always have the right answer, or they have a good answer, or they stimulate thought. That's a thought leader. Okay?
Yes.
How do you regard internal leadership boards? So if you're part of an operating company, in addition to being on a named board, advisory board, but internally you'll have kind of an executive board, that kind of thing. How does that factor into the calculus?
If you are on the executive team, but that's good. That's helpful. If you are on your own company board as a corporate member, so in other words, you're the CEO and you're the chair of the board, or they've separated it out and you're, that's good too. It shows that you've had some board experience. So you would get to check off and say, I have had board experience. So it's all about how you write it up. So it's all about how you can talk about it, the things that you've done. You know, when you're thinking about how do you talk about being the difference between a board member and a C-suite member, it's how you talk about that thought leadership. Have you, like I said, moved the conversation? Have you been able to help with the strategic thinking? Are you an expert in seeing trends? You know, how many companies have you sold? If this company is all about selling, the fact that you've sold a couple 5 times EBITDA or whatever, you become a thought leader in that area that they don't have. Did that? So you answered the questions. Any comments, any ahas, any, oh, it's time for me to leave the room? All right.
On your last question, how many boards really want brutal candor?
Not many.
I think that they all will say that they want brutal candor, but really what that means, I use that because I want you to be able to convince me that you know how to move people's thinking, you know how to leapfrog on other ideas, that kind of thing. So I say brutal candor. But on a board today, because of the risk, if you don't have the chops to bring up a topic in the right way and make sure that the board is paying attention to the things that they need to pay attention, you've got major risk on your hands. So you have to be able to do it. It's just that you can't stand up and say, well, I think you're an idiot. I mean, you know, it's like being anywhere else. It's how you play in the sandbox of the board. I don't know how better, did that help?
That, I would use a different phrase than brutal candor.
Okay, what would you use, Mark? I'm always willing to make some adjustments.
Formulate and sell a point of view.
That's a very good way of saying it. Any other questions as we...
So I think what Mark was getting at with this comment, which I agree with this issue of office politics and clickiness on board, which nobody likes to talk about because they're afraid to confront it. But if this is your model and this is your company, you have to confront that. That happens where you have groupthink, you have cliques. Look at the JCPenney board. We have Bill Ackman, activist investor, come on, recruit Ron Johnson, ruin the company, and then lose $500 million, and now it's gone. So that you got to confront that. And that companies that innovate, they're able to overcome that.
I think that you're definitely right. As boards continue to change the way they bring people on, or for instance today, 366 first-time board members, that's huge. And because of the landscape, those board members look differently. So you'll see, I think there's a slide in here, or maybe I took it out, that said in the past, 55% of all board members were CEOs and CFOs. That number's changing because nowadays companies don't allow their CEOs and CFOs to be on more than one corporate board because they're busy. So without that constant feed, it opens up board seats to other people, and those other people are coming from a different generation. Adding women to the board, it's just another face, another change. I think you'll see changes there. I don't think it'll happen overnight, but with all of the stuff that's going on and all of the boards that have gotten in trouble because they weren't paying attention, and the fact that there are activist shareholders everywhere, you're going to see some changes. You can hope for that. All right, I'm going to move on. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to pull on that thread a bit more in terms of candor at the board level and the cronyism that happens. So as you work with boards, I mean, that direction is set by the chairman, who's often the CEO, some separate role. But if you work with companies, how willing are they to address that? You've been on boards, both internal operating boards and external, where the message is very carefully curated. It makes sense to the board. And I also don't think the board has a full perspective of what's going on.
I think you're right. I would say that the bigger the board, the harder it is to change, and the slower the boat to turn. Today, in the smaller, mid-sized boards, I think that there's more opportunity, and as I am working with clients who are getting on boards and then meeting with them after, they are starting to talk about, we're seeing changes in the board because all the people, you know, I'm on a board of 8, 5 of us are new. Well, that changes things pretty quickly. You know, I can't talk to the multinational board because I don't play there, and my clients don't usually play there. I think they'd be slower. You know, a lot of companies now are separating that CEO role and the chairman role. That's going to become more and more of a trend. That's a good thing. And so again, I say, I think things are changing. I would say 5 years ago, when we started doing this, there wasn't a whole lot of change going on, and so the slides just said, and it grew 2%, and this was 2%, and this was 2%, because a lot wasn't happening. But over the last 5 years, there has been some monumental changes in the boardroom, and with that comes changes in the strategy of how they do things. Okay? I'll move to the next one. So, when you're thinking about assessing your readiness, I guess there's some pretty big questions you got to ask. So, these are things that I think you have to have compelling answers for. You have to be able to show real impact in your narrative. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the narrative, but these are some questions. What are some of the examples of thought leadership, insights that you've contributed, and how have they impacted an organization? So, you know, you got to be able to tell really good stories about the work that you've done. And normally on a resume, what you say, I changed the way I enhanced the systems and processes, leading to a 37% increase in blah, blah. Well, that's not what you need for a story about how do you use your thought leadership to impact an organization's success. It's a different story, so you got to know what they are. How can you leverage your work experience? So, you know, here you are, 20, 15, 30 years. How do you leverage all that into the kinds of strategic conversations that are occurring at the board level? So now it's not all about what I've done, what my titles have been, but how do you have those strategic conversations that the board wants to have at that level? Those are stories you have to think about. You have to think about, what have you been doing, what have you done, how do you sway your entire company to walk down a certain path, how do you get engagement? Those kinds of things can become good stories for your board narrative. And what specific functional expertise makes you qualified for a committee? It's easy if you're a CFO, because you get to say, I could be on the audit committee. But if you're not a CFO, it's hard. You have to be able to link that. I've had a couple of HR clients who have said, I want to be on boards because I could be on the comp committee. Boards don't want HR people on the comp committee because they have an HR person in the company. So what they really want is they want a CEO who understands all of the intricacies of how they could get paid and how they shouldn't get paid and what's right and what's wrong and what's legal and what's not legal. Be thinking, so they want people who've been there, done that. But you have to be able to identify, did I not? Yeah, I did. Okay, so you have to be able to be thinking about the kinds of stories you're going to tell or the kinds of information you can translate when you're starting to think through board conversations. So let's talk about increasing your readiness. Now, obviously, that kind of depends on how long your runway is. So if you've got 1 year, a little shorter. If you got 10 years, you got a lot of time. So one of the things we always say is raise your profile. So what does that mean? Become a recognized subject matter expert. Speak like this. Go out and do some media exposure. Do interviews. Think about publishing white pages. Do a TED Talk. There's a lot of different ways that you can build your brand, and you can do it fairly quickly. Another one is building your network. So what does that mean, building your network? Does it mean just adding more people, more friends to LinkedIn or Facebook? No, that's not what it means. It's really about engaging with the senior team, talking to your CEO, seeing if they can help introduce you to that circle, maybe working with board, if you have a board, networking with board members. I'm always surprised at how many people don't meet and take to lunch their senior team and their board, when in reality, that's a really good thing to do. It's a really good thing to do on a nonprofit board as well. So you join a nonprofit board, you should be meeting every single person on that board for a cup of coffee, because that's where your network can grow. You know, you're on a nonprofit board, you're sitting next to the person who happens to be the COO at Smith Medical. You should have taken him out to lunch. So building that network, building your credentials, again, is taking operational roles, because what they really want are operators. So operational roles that have strategic projects, P&L responsibility, international assignments, that kind of thing. The other thing is negotiating the right title. So in our business, I work with a lot of people who are in transition, and they always say to me, title doesn't matter. I just want to have good work, get paid well, do what I want to do. Except for title does matter, because if you don't have a good title, you can't make the next step to what you want to do. So negotiate your titles. Sometimes you can even exchange maybe a little bit of money for a better title in the company. It's worth it. It's worth it. Attend board training, because you really need to be current on governance. Governance used to be one of those things that you could say, I understand board governance, and you were special. But today, board governance really is like the minimum requirement. You can't even talk to being on a corporate board if you don't understand governance. So you want to make sure that you can do that. Trade associations are good ways to get some complex information. So as you're getting involved in the community boards, your alma mater board, those kinds of things. So, going to market. What's important? So we always say you need a board bio, and a board bio consists of two things: your career story and credentialing. A lot of times people say, well, I have a bio on the website of my company. That's not a board bio. Or they say, you know, I've got a resume. I had somebody help me with this great resume. Not a board bio. So what you really need is a very specific document that can package you and present you forward, showing what your value proposition is to a board. We have found that in our practice, we have worked really hard at developing a really good board bio package. And when our people go out and I get the feedback from them, that's the one comment that they always say. They say, everybody loves my board bio. We have I think since we've been doing this, about 90% of the people we work with have ended up on at least one board. And I am pretty positive it has everything to do with them, but they got their toe in the door because they have a really great board bio. So that's kind of an important piece. Let's see. Story, credentialing. Credentialing really is about what have you done, what are your titles, what size company have you had, and all of that. But the most important thing really is being able to build that narrative, to tell your story, answering all those questions, so that you can differentiate yourself from the other person who just has a resume, who is really going to talk about, well, I did this and I accomplished this and I saved the company $3,000, you know, whatever. So you want to make sure it's really different. Oh, I didn't push the slides. Your career story, credentialing. Okay, so your career story, like I said, it's going to highlight your recent experiences. You really need to be pretty clear and really focused about what you want to say. It should really be an overview of your whole career, but again, it's going to be probably in 4 paragraphs. And so, you know, you think 4 paragraphs, 200 words, holy cow, that's my whole career. But there are ways to do that. You want to make sure that you can get it very tight and very focused so that you have a really good story to tell. You want to talk about your P&L accountability, what's the biggest budget you've ever had, what are your titles, all of that, so that you can have a document, about a 2-page, let's say, document that will really lead towards board bios. Now, sometimes when people say to me, well, you know, I went through the board bios of all the people on our company board or on my company board, and they don't look like yours. They don't. Because they're probably been on 1, 2, 3, 4 boards, and they don't need it. But if you've never been on a board before, you really have to look sharp, and you have to be able to make sure that they can tell what you can give, what your value is, and how you can be the best board member that they've ever had. So that's why it's a little different. Going to market. So your credentials. So now we're just talking about that bottom half. You know, what are your credentials? You just need to have past, present employers, date of employment, titles, and scope of role. None of those accomplishments that you would have on your resume. Questions? Any questions about that? Okay, then I'm going to kind of move on to going to market, which is networking. And, you know, I think it's important to say that when you're looking for a board seat, candidates are invited to boards. You can't really directly solicit, send in your application and say, I'd really like to be on your board. It doesn't really work that way. So I always say what you need to do, meet the right people, have the right market message, ask the right questions, and ask for referrals to the right people. So when you're thinking about who are you going to network with for a board seat, you know, it's CEOs, CFOs, board chairs, nominating committee members, deal sponsors, VCs, you know, PE guys, general counsels are really good. Your audit firm is another place to network, but it is really about getting to all the right people and having the right message and asking the right questions. I have a couple questions here because I think people say, well, what do I ask them? You know, you can't just say, so tell me, how do you get on your board? So you ask questions like, what are the top 3 strategic imperatives that you're getting, that is getting the focus, energy, and resources of your board? That brings them to talk a lot about what they're doing. You might want to ask the question, what risks does the company have? And what opportunities do they foresee? How will the economy enter into that? Gets them talking about things they're really interested in, and you learn a lot. So these are the kinds of, I think, high-level questions I want to be asking if I were, you know, trying to doing some networking for a board. And then really at the end, you can say, given my background, my expertise, who else do you think I should talk to? Who would be other, would you refer me? So that's kind of the whole networking package, because if you don't do that, you know, board service is a long way off. So just to end, we talked about market intelligence. I think that probably you got the sense that getting on a board isn't easy. There's a lot of people who want to get on boards, and there's only so many seats. So differentiate yourself, do what you can to build your readiness so that you're prepared. Then we talked just a little bit about readiness. What are some of the things that you have to be thinking about? Education, job experience, that kind of thing. We talked about increasing your readiness a little bit, building your brand, all of those pieces, and then finally going to market, which basically is your board bio and, of course, networking. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to take questions at the end in case anybody has any. There are a couple of, I brought one handout, so there's one out there if you're interested. It's an old article from 2013 from Egon Zehnder, but it's an evergreen article. I use it with all of my clients as well. And it's a 4-part or 3-part, but I only brought part 1 because it's about how do you prepare? What do you have to do to get on a board? And it's probably the best quick little read that I've found. So there are some, Daniel has them on a table back there. So if you're interested and want to take one, please feel free. Questions? Any more questions? Yes.
Mary, can you talk a little bit about sort of your business model for people that want to come work with you? How is that set up and structured?
Yeah, our board readiness is a one-on-one program. So our board readiness service, it's one-on-one. We start out kind of in the discovery mode to say, let's go through and see if you are a candidate for board service, because obviously if you're not, we want to let you know, or if we think you can get there in the time that your runway is, we would let you know that. So we go through the pieces of discovery, doing competency review, credential review, all of those kinds of discovery or assessment kinds of work. And then we move on to building your board bio. and making sure that you can tell your story, your narrative is built, you can get it down on paper, you can have a document that is dynamic enough, or maybe I should say is strong enough that people stand up and say, wow, I'd really like this person on my board. We help you change your LinkedIn to work through that. We build a market message so that when you go out, you know exactly what to say, you know how to engage people in your networking, you know how to get a networking meeting. And then we put together a market strategy. So what board should you look at? I just was working with a client of mine, and I asked him the question, so are there any boards you wouldn't want to be on? And he had a list. I don't want to be on gambling, tobacco, alcohol, he had a list of things. So you really want to know that before you spend all this time thinking about what are the boards you want to look for. So we build a market strategy. Then we'll do a few introductions if you need them to the right kind of people, 1 or 2 or 3. We help you start networking. And then as you start to get traction, we do board interview prep for a board interview, which is different than interviewing for a job. So we do that, and then we help you through the due diligence process. So that's kind of what it looks like. Hopefully that was clear enough. Any other questions?
So I'll put out, Mary, on the candor question came up like 3 different ways. Anything else to expand on that? Any words of wisdom for the folks here?
The only other thing I would say is that I've had a couple of board members, going to Mark's point, or clients who have said, I think the value I bring to a board is that I'm a truth teller. And, that is something you can never say. Because it implies that nobody else is. So I think you do have to be a little careful. I'm going to actually take your advice on maybe re-sentencing that. Because really what you have to be able to do is have to be able to have these conversations in a group of people who are all high players. They're used to being in charge. They all have their own ideas. They probably, most of them have either their own company or on an executive team somewhere else. And so there's a lot of intellectual property in the room. And so how do you navigate through that without being the board member in the room who never speaks? Because that's even worse. So it is a trick. And part of that comes from your market message, building your narrative, being totally, having a really good understanding of your stories. And then the due diligence when you get to a board, because you want to make sure this is the kind of culture that you want to be on, that the board itself are the kind of people you want, that they understand who you are and what you have to offer, and that they want to listen to what you have to say. All of that kind of comes in that board due diligence that you're going to do. So even though you've never been on a board and you get offered to be a board, you might say no if it's not the right fit. Question?
Speaking of that, so there are other tips as you're researching the boards that you might want to go on that would be maybe signs that, I should dig into this further, this might not be the best fit for me, or any red flags that you've seen some of your clients have when you've gone through the due diligence process?
I think the first you're going to pull their information. If it's a privately held company, there's just less. So research doesn't always help you. The best thing is to get in and meet the people. As soon as you get in and meet 1 or 2 board members, you kind of have a general idea. It's pretty clear. You can usually, the chair might be able to cover some things up, but if you go 1 step away from that, you're gonna hear what's happening. And then you ask people. You talk to search firms, you talk to your friends, you talk to other board members on your board to find out what they know. But a lot of it comes from just asking the right questions during your board interviews. So, that's a piece that we kind of help you based on who the board is, how big it is. Are you the only independent director? Are you one of 5? Depends. Yes?
Just got one comment. I would say your point on confronting the brutal facts is validated by a famous Harvard professor named John B. Cotter, who wrote a really famous leadership book and said that it's essential that some people on the board can confront the brutal facts. And if
Oh, you have to talk louder, I can't even hear you.
John B. Cotter, Harvard, he validates your concept of confronting the brutal facts. It's needed. And if you look at the Target data breach, what didn't they do? What didn't they do?
It's a complicated world out there, isn't it? It's kind of scary.
So if you were at the end, we can stay as long as anybody would like to stay, but if you were to kind of summarize everything, Mary, and kind of wrap it up with a little bit of parting wisdom for everybody.
I would say if you are interested and you are either there or want to build your credentials, this is the time, because going forward, they're going to need really good leaders in all the companies that exist in America today. So it's your duty to prepare so that you can be a great leader going forward at the PIA.
Thank you.